all the superheroes, or pretty well all of them, seem to have a bit of a weakness somewhere. So Superman's got kryptonite. Batman gets all het up when he gets memories of his dead parents. Wonder Woman can be defeated, apparently, if her lasso is tied around her. I didn't know that. Iron Man has pride as his downfall. The Hulk has anger, depending on how you look at it, really. Anger makes him into a Hulk, but also he can't control it. And Samson is no different. He's got his weaknesses. He's got quite a lot of them, actually. And we're going to just look at bits of his life to tell us a bit about what sort of a person he was. And we'll be able to... We're going to start with the story of his birth. So I'm going to start recording there. And someone in the Smith family has the story of Samson's birth.
Again, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord handed them over to the Philistines, who oppressed them for 40 years. In those days, a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan lived in the town of Zorah. His wife was unable to become pregnant, and they had no children. The angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and said, "Even though you have been unable to have children, you will soon become pregnant and give birth to a son. So be careful. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazarite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines." The woman ran and told her husband, "A man of God appeared to me. He looked like one of God's angels, terrifying to see. I didn't ask where he was from, and he didn't tell me his name, but he told me, 'You will become pregnant and give birth to a son. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. Your son will be dedicated to God as a Nazarite from the moment of his birth until the day of his death.'"
Thank you very much. Right, so Samson's mother, she's pretty sharp, she's pretty on the ball, and she has a prophecy given to her by an angel. And there's a sort of funny bit in chapter 13 where we find out that Samson's father's a little bit slow off the mark compared to his mother. Anyway, you ought to read the whole story just to get a taste of that. And we get this awesome appearance of an angel, and later on he does some amazing things, and we find that he's got a very mysterious name. And I can only just encourage you to read the rest of chapter 13 for yourself. But the important thing about Samson is contained in those verses which we've just read. He's going to be a Nazarite. And if you read Numbers chapter 6, you'll find out what a Nazarite is. And the most important things to know about a Nazarite are these three. He must not cut his hair. He must never drink alcohol or wine, or even eat grapes. And he must not go near a dead body. So all of these three are really important. Cutting hair, drinking wine, going near a dead body. And in addition to that, Samson's part of God's people. And God's people, the Israelites, were forbidden to marry outside the Israelites, because what happened if they did was that they tended to worship idols and so forth and other gods. And also, no Israelite was meant to eat certain food like pork and certain seafoods and fat and other stuff. So there were certain specific rules that they had to follow in terms of what they were going to eat. And we will find out that as the story goes on, Samson breaks every single one of these rules. The rules of a Nazarite and the rules of God's people in general. But there is a promise there that Samson will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines, and he will be dedicated to God. And right at the end of chapter 13, we see that the Spirit of God begins to stir in Samson. But let's look at the next part, which Toby's going to read, where we start to see Samson as a bit of a superhero. So if you can unmute and Toby can come on camera and read to us, that'd be brilliant.
Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in
Timnah.
Now get her for me as a wife. Amor, his father and mother replied, isn't there
An acceptable
woman among your relatives or belong all your people? Must you go to the
uncircumcised
Philistine to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who seeking on
an occasion
to
confront
the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the
vineyards,
suddenly a young lion came roaring towards him. He split off.
The Spirit
of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother he had done. Then he went down to talk with the young woman, and he liked her.
Well done.
So he goes and he finds a woman. As we said, that the Israelites are not meant to marry outside the other Israelites, but he starts going and looking for women that he likes outside Israel. And you find that everybody that he chooses that he might want to marry is outside of the Israelite people, as we go through the story of Samuel. And he doesn't listen to his father and mother, and I'm sure the children will know that that's a bad thing too. But God works through this anyway. He works through his disobedience to bring about his purposes. And Samson's parents go down and start to arrange his marriage. But Samson's travelling through the vineyards, and a lion attacks him and tries to kill him. But Samson just tears it apart, limb from limb, in an awesome display of strength, because God's Spirit has given him this special gift. And I wonder whether it's worth looking at this, because sometimes in the Old Testament you get pictures of something which happens physically, and then in the New Testament you can apply them physically. In the New Testament we hear that the devil is prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking for someone to devour, and we're meant to stand up to him strong in the faith. And I guess that the enemy wanted to stop Samson doing his mission from God, performing his mission from God, and to kill him, but against God's power he had no strength. And it seems like he's quite modest at this point. He doesn't even tell his parents about it. Now later on in this, he goes back. The lion's carcass must have dried out in the sun, and bees have made a hive in the lion's body, and honey is in there. And Samson, who, remember, is not meant to touch a dead body, even from his own family, goes up to the lion and scoops out some honey. So he's eating unclean food, which is a direct contradiction of God's law. Then he goes off to a wedding feast with the Philistines. And I'm guessing that at a wedding feast you would not only have food that was unclean for Israelites, because we know that the Philistines ate pork and various seafood. They even ate dogs occasionally, apparently. All of those things are against God's law. But also there was almost certainly going to be lots of wine around, and it doesn't say that Samson didn't drink all of that. It's likely that he's breaking even more of God's laws. He's marrying outside God's people. He's probably drinking alcohol, and that happens throughout his life. He's eating unclean food. He's touching dead bodies. In fact, by now, the only thing out of all his vows and things that he's not done is having his hair cut. That's the one thing that's left. But God's merciful to him, and he doesn't take away his powers, which he's given to him specially to achieve his purposes. So let's have another look at his superhero powers being used, and this is again the Smiths, I think, Judges 15.
Because you did this, Samson vowed, I won't rest until I take my revenge on you. So he attacked the Philistines with great fury and killed many of them. Then he went to live in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines retaliated by setting up camp in Judah and spreading out near the town of Lehi. The men of Judah asked the Philistines, "Why are you attacking us?" The Philistines replied, "We have come to capture Samson. We have come to pay him back for what he did to us." So 3,000 men of Judah went down to get Samson at the cave in the rock of Etam. They said to Samson, "Don't you realize the Philistines rule over us? What are you doing to us?" But Samson replied, "I only did to them what they did to me." But the men of Judah told him, "We have come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." "All right," Samson said, "but promise that you won't kill me yourselves." "We will only tie you up and hand you to the Philistines," they replied. "We won't kill you." So they tied him up with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. As Samson arrived at Lehi, the Philistines came shouting in triumph. But the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson, and he snapped the ropes off on his arms as if they were burnt strands of flax, and they fell from his wrists. Then he found a jawbone of a recently killed donkey. He picked it up and killed 1,000 Philistines with it. Then Samson said, "With the jawbone of a donkey, I have piled them in heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I've killed 1,000 men." When he finished his boasting, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was named Jawbone Hill.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to mute you now. And we've got some amazing readers. Thank you guys for all of that. Right, well, earlier on I said he wasn't proud or boastful about that lion that he killed, but here he's very boastful, isn't he? mind you, you can sort of understand it, can't you? He's single-handedly kills a whole army of Philistines using just the jawbone of a donkey. It's an amazing feat. And then he's really thirsty after that. He feels as if he's dying of thirst, and he asks God for a drink, and God makes water flow from a rock. So Samson is still allowed by God to do mighty deeds in his name, even though he's being rebellious. I think we can sort of learn a bit from that, because Christians sometimes think that, you know, they do something wrong and then God doesn't punish them for it, and they think, well, maybe God doesn't care. But actually God does care, but he's just incredibly loving and gracious and patient with us. And I can think of a number of Christians who've been used in amazing ways by God, even when they were being disobedient. So let's not think that because God doesn't take away his blessings from us, he approves of everything we do. Because disobedience to God, especially deliberate disobedience, when we know he's told us not to do something, is a very dangerous thing to our spiritual health. Okay, there's loads more stories in the life of Samson, overcoming the Philistines again. He carries the city gates of a hill up a hill on his back. He chases after more Philistine women. But in the end, Samson's disobedience to God takes his toll, and he allows his hair to be cut. And he loses his strength. And he's treated cruelly by the Philistines and blinded by them and made to work as a slave and mocked. And I'm sure he regretted many of the things that he'd done when he took God's favour for granted. Now, in the end, there's a sort of bittersweet, happy, sad ending, because he does actually do one last deed, mighty deed, which you've just seen in Jono's picture, with him pushing the pillars of the building apart with the strength that comes back. But I think we can all learn from Samson. We all struggle with different things in our lives. Some of us struggle with anger, losing our temper. Some of us it's pride and arrogance. And for others of us, it's other temptations we give in to. And all of those things make us less effective in God's service. I mean, Samson could have been so much greater if he just had that self-control. Now, Joseph literally, I don't remember the story of Joseph, he literally ran away from temptation. And that can be good for us too, to remember that sometimes we just need to run away from temptation. It's too strong for us, and we need to go in the opposite direction as fast as we can. In 1 John chapter 2 it says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. Everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world." So love for the world and all the stuff that's in there is the opposite of love for God, we read there. If we pursue after the things that the flesh desires and put them before God, whether it's a shiny motorbike or somebody else's house or whatever it is, then we're in danger of straying away from God. And if we just go after things that make us look good or feel proud, that'll take us away from God. Here's one last verse I want to leave you with, and then Shane's just going to give you a very, very short account of something that he's struggled with and what happened about that. 1 Corinthians 10. "So if you think you're standing firm, be careful you don't fall. No testing has overtaken you that is not common to everyone. God is faithful. He will not let you be tested beyond your strength. But with the testing, he will also provide the way out so that you can endure it." That's a promise from God. So I'm going to mute myself, and Shane's just going to give us a 2 minutes, Shane, 2 minutes, account of something that he's struggled with.
Yeah, so I was drinking, drinking more than what I should have been drinking. And then I was on the Alpha course the one night, and the Alpha course had finished. So I went for a drive. As I'm driving down, I'm heading towards Portugal. I think I got myself a few beers. And I'm kind of battling with it, and I'm like, temptation doesn't come from God. So I'm like, oh, drive past Port Street. And now I'm kind of like, should I or shouldn't I? And as I've driven back into my estate, I've come home. There was a car and it was kind of speeding behind me as I parked in by my mum's. And I thought, oh, what's going on here? It seems a bit creepy. So anyway, they've got out of the car and they've come over to my van. They started to speak. I thought, oh, is this trouble or is it not? And then they said to me, I know them from a past, and they said to me, what you been up to? I was like, just finished the Alpha course. And I was like, what's that? I was like, it's a course I've been doing through church. And they was like, you don't go to church? I was like, yeah, I did. I was like, this ain't the shame we know. So anyway, we was kind of just speaking to these guys, and they went up the road to get in some other things, drugs, and I was speaking to them how God's brought me from drugs and how I was battling with it, and what the devil wants to do in your life and how it's made for destruction. And this guy says to me, so who's your savior? And I was like, the Lord Jesus Christ. So I was just speaking, and then I was just speaking like about what God can do in your life. And they was like, well, we're going to appear to get some more stuff. So I thought, I don't know, I felt this thing inside me where I can't, I've got to speak now. And I know I was speaking to one of them. Well, after about 5 minutes, this guy said, Rich, he said, I think it's time. It's about time. I want to go back to my wife and kids tonight. It's about time for me to go home to my wife and kids. Let's go home now. So that's enough for me for the night. So anyway, I'm like, well, you know, God's doing something awesome here. And then after that, like they shook hands. We shook hands, and then they jumped into the car. And they didn't into that house. They went straight off. And I've gone into mine, and I'm thinking, wow, you know, like the devil tried distracting me that night by taking me to the drink. And I've fought against it, and then I could actually see what God was calling me to in the end after fighting it. And it was just crazy. And I went inside mine, I was excited, I was just full of joy. I could feel the presence of God inside of me. I was just pumping, I was excited. But what the devil was trying to do was distract me with the drink. And temptations, it's hard, you know, and sometimes I gave into it, and sometimes. But how God used that situation that night by drawing me away from that drink was incredible. So, yes, I'm going to have to stop speaking, Steve.
Thanks, Shane. And is that the end of temptation? You never get tempted again?
Oh, no, I still get tempted now to this day. Now I'm always getting tempted, but it's how we do, you know, there's some things it's hard to fight. But the thing that comes, you know, it said when Jesus says that but how can I say when we get tempted? Even Jesus got tempted, you know. So we know we don't walk through it alone, but it's how we deal with some temptations I've given into, but it's how what God does and how I'll use that situation that night when I didn't go into that shop. It was more to do with His timing, really, because if I'd gone into that shop that night, then there was no chance I would have spoke to them about what God's done in my life and what He's continued to do in my life, how I've been saved. So yeah.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's really helpful.